Well, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how the BLM has progressed since the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, here, at least here in Portland? What have you seen?
I think the most interesting part of all of this is it's actually got momentum now. For me, being from Mississippi and being, just now 50 years old, this isn't new. Like, this is something we've been talking about. My mom's generation talked about it, and then my generation talked about it. The thing that's different now versus anything before, because we can talk about Breonna Taylor, and they mentioned her boyfriend who they thought was a criminal, right? Ahmaud Arbery, maybe he was breaking into the house, maybe he wasn't, right? There was always an excuse. There was always a reasoning. There was always something that let the world off the hook as far as their outrage was concerned. This time it was different. This time it was caught on tape. I mean, this guy, there was no reason for this man, George Floyd, to die. Whether or not he had done something illegal is irrelevant. He was completely subdued. He was laying on the ground. The knee on the back of the neck was that thing that was unexplainable, it was unavoidable, and it was unexcusable. So it has to be dealt with. And I think this is the first time, at least in my generation, that it's a truly unexcusable act.
I think you and I talked about this the other day, it was the question I posed, and you just went off with it. I said, is the death of George Floyd the most important thing that's happened to the Black community in the last hundreds of years?
I won't go in as deep as I did when we were talking privately for obvious reasons.
Right.
But, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last 100 years. What I will say is this is probably the most important thing that's happened since the Civil Rights Movement of 1964. Prior to the Civil Rights Movement, it was obvious that there was a discrepancy. There was not a separate but equal scenario in this country. It was separate, not even close to equal. Then things just people kind of felt like it was equal. Oh, we gave you civil rights. What's the problem? You should be happy with that. That should be enough. But we kept complaining. We kept telling you that things are not equal. Still not good. There's still changes that need to be made. And now with the death of George Floyd, again, people are paying attention. And it's not just the Black community. It's all communities. And it's not just here in the U.S. I think the most important thing that we've seen is that there is now an international feeling that we need to fix this on an international level. And it's not just Black and white. George Floyd represents the issue of race in this country. But the issue of race is just one of. There's also the issue of gender and the issue of nationality. All of these things have been brought to the forefront because of George Floyd's death. And I think that we're headed in the right direction.
So you said fix it until we fix it. How do we fix it? Ultimately, I mean, $1 million question. What are the things that you're seeing now that are taking place pushing us in the right direction? Is this the positive move that we need to be having right now?
I think some of it certainly is. You look at the conversation is such that it's got to head in the right direction. However, there's a lot of things that are going on that I'll be honest with you, Adam, I don't see the point. Like, part of the conversation we had the other day, stripping the name Civil War from the game between the Ducks and the Beavers. I mean, stop. Like, let it go. That doesn't even matter. That is so inconsequential in terms of what's really going on in this country. Nobody cares, particularly Black people. We don't care that it's called the Civil War. We completely understood it. It's interstate rivals, all of that kind of stuff. It only made sense. But to take that name down, in my opinion, and there might be a lot of people who completely disagree with me, but in my opinion, it's almost making a mockery of everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. To take something so trivial and say, oh, this is how we're going to show we care. Well, if that's how you care, I'd rather you not. I'd rather you do something substantial. How about this one? University of Oregon and Oregon State. Instead of stripping the name Civil War, keep the name Civil War and bring your faculty and staff to represent race relations in this country. 13% of the U.S. population is Black. Make 13% of your staff and faculty Black, because that's true movement. Mm-hmm. Until then, changing the name Civil War, the most irrelevant thing that ever could have been done as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think they've been nitpicking it quite a bit. Um,
and
yeah.
that's the problem you run into, is that there's always that chance. There's always that chance that we become too particular about every little thing. And in being so particular, it's like John Wooden said, don't mistake activity for achievement.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a state of activity, but
Yeah.
not all of it is achievement. And we got to get to achievement.
Yeah, I agree. No question. Let me ask you this. You've been in Portland 15, 20 years. Am I in the right ballpark?
21 years.
21 years. Okay.
Yep.
Native of Mississippi, predominantly black in Mississippi. You come to Oregon. Things changed, didn't they? Being black in Portland, let me ask you about being black in Portland. How has that changed you as a person?
Well, so being black in Portland it's different. And it's different because the black neighborhood in Portland isn't a deep neighborhood, meaning it hasn't been here that long. I go back to my neighborhood at home, and I can go to a graveyard that my grandparents were buried in. And we have that lineage, and I know where I came from. Being black in Portland was different because the black community is only just now really starting to take roots. We're only in our third generation of black people in the city of Portland. And without that root bound, or without that root system, it's hard to really progress. I will say this though, the black people in Portland overall work the hardest I've ever seen at equality. And it is very refreshing. They do not let this city off the hook. If you're not pulling your weight, they will let you know time and time again. That is one of the biggest differences between being here and being home. At home, some people, we'll call them some people would do everything they could to make sure that black people didn't have a voice. And it was so oppressive that black people in a lot of the South didn't feel comfortable having a voice. The one thing that Oregon and Portland in particular has gotten right is they have given a voice to an otherwise voiceless community. So there's a lot of things that are done right here, and things that are only getting better as time progresses.
Being a black athlete in Portland, is that different? We've talked about this ad nauseum for the last 15, 20 years, attracting free agents to the city of Portland. It doesn't have what the black community would like to see, the clubs situation. It's just different here. But guys that are, you associate with them all the time still, whether it's Dame or CJ, they've made a home here. The teams from the early 90s with Terry and Clyde and, Jerome, all of them that, made Portland their home. But being an athlete in Portland, is it difficult? What are you hearing from the current crop of athletes?
I don't see it as difficult, and I don't think the guys see it as difficult. In fact, it's actually more of a blessing because Portland's a one-horse town. Mm-hmm. It's a trailblazer town. I mean, that's really all you got, and then you've got the Ducks in Eugene, but that's as close as you get. There's a lot of perks that come with it. There's a fishbowl lifestyle. If you're not ready for living in a complete fishbowl, it can be a lot to handle. But overall, I think being an athlete here is probably one of the best cities outside of maybe San Antonio with the Spurs. Portland is one of those cities that loves its trailblazers, loves its athletes overall. It's just about making sure that you conduct yourself in a manner, in a way that makes people comfortable. That's probably the negative, is that, anything you do that's not considered normal in this city, it's going to get looked at. It's going to get talked about. It's going to be front page news. So there's good and bad, but I think overall being an athlete here is something that's not so hard to deal with.
We talk about guys, he's got a great platform in which he can, whether it's LeBron or Dame or whoever, they've got a large voice for change. Do you feel that that's working now across the country, given the temperature of everything that's happening politically in this country?
Absolutely. There has never been a time when athletes had a bigger voice. Mm-hmm. My generation, it's not that we were quiet. We didn't have social media. Like, in order for the world to find out what we were doing, we had to go to the newspaper, and then the newspaper got to interpret what we were saying, and then the people reading the article got to interpret again. So it's like third-party conversations, whereas now, man, LeBron gets to go straight to however many millions of followers he has. He's direct. There is no misinterpretation. He says what he means what he says. Dame the same way. I mean, that's, in fact, I'll tell you what, watching Dame navigate the restart to the season has been phenomenal. He understands his status. He understands his ability to persuade people and the NBA, and he's used it the right way. I mean, to see him out front marching with the city of Portland was, I mean, it was one of those things that really makes you proud to be a Portlander, to be a trailblazer, to be a black man. He hit all three of them and knocked them out of the park.
What do you think of the protests that are happening in Portland? It's 40 nights. I think tonight will be 40 nights now that they've been protesting. Are they getting is the message getting lost, I guess is my question right now.
I don't think the message is getting lost with the protest. I think the message sometimes gets skewed with the riots, right? And there's a difference, and we have to make sure that as we have these conversations, we don't allow one to become the other. The protesters and the rioters are not necessarily the same people. That's not to say that sometimes it isn't, but for the most part, if you look back and look at the people who were rioting, the first couple of nights, it was just anger coming out, right? And it happens. Things boil over, you get it out of your system. But since then, most of the protests have been peaceful protests. Every now and again, you get some fringe people that do something more than just a peaceful protest. We have to keep our energy and our focus on the peaceful protest, the message of the protest, not the violence, not the destruction, the message. The message will always be the same: equality and justice. That's what I think Black people in particular, as the representative group, what's happening now is going to give rise to civil rights for everybody if we keep the message strong and positive and headed in the right direction.
Speaking of the right direction, do you feel in your heart of hearts, are we headed there?
I think so. I think we don't have a choice. There is no option. We have to go the right direction. If we don't go the right direction, it's only going to get worse. It's funny, and we're friends on Facebook, and anybody who's friends with me on Facebook knows that I don't mind being mildly controversial on Facebook, right? And I made a post that I knew would be controversial. It was shortly after the death of George Floyd. And it went something like this: if you don't listen, we'll burn it down, right? And there were a lot of people that were really offended. All they heard was the burn it down part. And it was like, man, you didn't even hear. We don't want to burn it down. We want you to listen. But understand, if you don't listen, you're not really going to give us much of a choice, and we're going to have to burn it down.
Yeah.
And like, that's all people heard was, oh, how can you, promote violence? That's not what I'm doing. Actually, I'm letting you know that there is a way to avoid any of this. Just listen. And I really feel like right now, the world is listening, and it's making Black America want to be less provocative and want to have that open conversation.
Yeah. Listening and being a part of the change is the most important thing for everyone that was not aware of everything happening. I wrote this down. I said, I don't think white Americans realize how deep the cuts have been to the Black community until something like this happens.
Right. And that's a very true statement. It's hard to understand, like, I was watching The Matrix. You've seen The Matrix.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And The Matrix was what was it? It was the reality that the world is pulled over your eyes to hide the truth. White privilege is the Matrix, right? You don't believe it exists because white people struggle. We know that. I grew up with a bunch, I grew up in a poor neighborhood, and there were poor white people in my neighborhood. I understand that there is a struggle that exists for poor people overall and in general. However, poor white people, if you were to go to one of them and say, hey, you could be Black today, would you take it? If the answer's not yes, then guess what? Life's better for you than you think it is. And I think that's the conversation that needs to happen. We understand that there's levels of white privilege, there's and white guilt, but there needs to be the conversation that yes, it exists. Do some people, do everyone go through struggles? Absolutely. But white privilege is real. And that's not to say you should be ashamed of yourself for it. That's not to say that every single white person, you're bad. That's not it. It's to say that recognize that it exists so that we can create a framework to change, as opposed to saying, oh, it doesn't exist. Racism doesn't exist. There's no such thing as systemic racism, but there is. Worst comment that anybody can make to a black person is to bring up the term black on black crime, right? First of all, crime it's based on where you are, right? Most black people live around black people. Most white people live around white people. Most Asian people live around Asian people. Crime is intraracial, right? It's not interracial, it's intraracial. 85% of crimes against white people are committed by white people. 85% of crimes against black people are committed by black people. Then there's the idea of policing in the black community, right? I love this one. You're gonna love this one. I was thinking about this last night. Donald Trump says, and this is not a Donald Trump bash moment. We'll save that for a different time. This is the truth. Donald Trump says, I've instructed my leadership to stop testing so that the COVID cases can go down. I translated that into policing the black community. If you take the police out of the black communities, the crime rates will go down. It's really that simple, right? We put more police in black communities so we see more black crime. It's a cycle. It's the way it goes. We got to fix those types. There's so many. We could have a 3-day conversation, Adam, and we could add 10 more people, and but the truth is there's a lot of things that need to change. We are headed in the right direction. The unfortunate murder of George Floyd has started a dialogue that we have to maintain until that change actually happens. That's the beauty of all of this, is that the black community, especially with their allies in non-black communities, we're going hard for this change. And I really think we're on the cusp of something now.